Ladies, gentlemen, and haratum of all ages, now that we are a good few weeks into Season 2 for Diablo 4, and we all had all of our announcements at BlizzCon about what to expect for the rest of the season, I thought now would probably be a good time to talk about this season as a whole, what I think about all the changes that we got, all the changes that we have coming up further on, and go over both what I think are the major positives of the season that I think are worth noting on, and appreciating in hopes of the devs continuing that path forward in the future, as well as what I think are the real low points of the season as well, the things that are still in need of major improvement and sort of stick out like a sore thumb as major issues, even after the changes that have been made, and even in a season that is, on the whole, very solid. To start off then, my general feelings on this season are exceedingly positive, actually. I think given what we had at the start of Season 1 and what we had in the base game, the jump to the start of Season 2 was phenomenal. Yes, that feels like congratulating vegetables for growing using manure, but vegetables are a pretty big improvement over having to eat a big bag of manure, which is essentially what we were being asked to do at the start of Season 1. In comparison, I'd much rather eat the nicely fried up garlic butter Brussels sprouts than our Season 2. This metaphor is getting a little bit out of hand, but I'm just saying that while Season 2 is still not quite up to snuff with what I want the game to be long term, it is still a massive improvement over what we had at the start of Season 1, and of course over what we had in the base game too. If we talked about system improvements, probably the biggest thing is the resistances were actually fixed and genuinely matter now, with all of my endgame builds having the goal of running maxed 70% of every resistance, so you just don't have to worry about it anymore. Yes, in the end it means that we will wind up just not thinking about it once you're fully set up, but you have to work to that point. You have to work to make that an actual reward, and the reward is that you get genuine endgame bosses not doing any real damage to you once you have your resistances properly sorted out, and you can even push it further with elixirs and such in the future if you want to as well. This is just a massive fix, and I say fix because this is something that was purely broken before and now works as intended, and it turns out when it's working intended, it works quite well. Past that, we had all the changed with the damage buckets and damage calculations in general as well, the way that they changed multiplicative bonus affixes to mostly be additive to let the multipliers mostly come from legendary effects or from Paragon board nodes and glyphs, and the result of this is a much healthier way for people to think about builds in this game. Rather than every build in the game aiming for crits and vulnerable damage above all else, it's now dependent on builds and in a way that makes it far less punishing to have less perfect stats, because now all damage increase affixes are on at least a somewhat more even playing field. On top of that, we also get the training dummy added this season, in the middle of it, sure, but still it was added here, and the training dummy is great as far as builds, testing damage changes, everything like that. So while it might not be the biggest thing to happen like a few weeks into Season 2, this thing will get a lot of use in the future, trust me, and if you're ever wondering what changes actually feel like, this is where people will test it. Any information that you want to know about the game, this is where people will find it in the future. There's also the changes to the existing uniques where they shuffled some affix around and buffed a bunch of affixes on them too, and I think that was a really solid success as well, making uniques just feel a lot better across the board. Past that, the other real major Eternal Realm affecting concept is the addition of the new endgame bosses, as well as the new uniques and legendaries as a sort of combo system. As for the legendaries themselves, these have mostly gone unused so far. Some of them are interesting at least, so they may have a place in the future, but at the moment none of them are strong enough on their own to create or boost builds that are strong enough to be worth talking about. The uniques, however, the new uniques, there were 12 of them added to the game. Every single one of the class specific ones either boosts an existing build into being noteworthy, or is just responsible itself for the existence of a new noteworthy build, so they did a fantastic job with these. That's just the exact result that you were looking for with new uniques being added to the game. As for the generic uniques that they added 7 of those. 5 out of those 7 are genuinely very good. Flicker Step is in a ton of builds. Tibault's Will is nearly ubiquitous, as it's just up to 40% multiplicative damage in your pants slot that works for the vast majority of the builds with very little input, and well, the rest of them are still extremely solid too, until you get something like Soulbrand, which is still fairly good, and Tacits of the Dawning Sky, which boosts maximum resistances, and honestly, even this one, as the currently worst one of the new uniques, is still a good unique. It just isn't worth using at this current moment in the game. Currently, 70% resistances as your base maximum is enough to be fine in any content, but as they add in harder stuff, challenging us, even potentially something like the Abattoir of Zir that we're going to be having in December, we may find ourselves wanting even more protection from elements. This is when we'll want higher maximum resistance, which is where this unique would really shine. As far as the bosses themselves then, this is a fantastic addition to the game. A whole new endgame loop that actually feels like it is an an endgame loop. Before, our best endgame was just doing nightmare dungeons on higher and higher tiers, or maybe an Uber Lilith if you found fancy, but neither of those really rewarded you like they were challenging. There was no equal risk-reward factor. Whereas now with the itemization change-ups, nightmare dungeons feel a bit better. They actually give you high item power gear, guaranteed, but more importantly, we also had the addition of 5 endgame bosses, each of them with high drop rates on a set grouping of uniques. So not only did they add boss fights, 5 different ones, which are challenging until you're properly geared up at least, and these bosses are part of the endgame on Eternal, which means they'll be around forever. But they also made them a method to target farm the uniques in the game, which means that people can make the builds they want to easier. They can actually reliably expect to have a unique within a couple of days, and they also made the big one of the bosses, Duriel, have around a 2% drop rate on uber unique items, which is incredibly high for something that used to be so incredibly rare. As a whole, I love this system. I love the endgame bosses. I hope they expand on it. I hope they fix it up. They make it a little bit tighter. They add more bosses maybe, because I do have one gripe with it, and it is pretty major, which awkwardly isn't even the fault of the new edition so much as the old mechanics that they tied them to, and that is Helltide. The end goal of these bosses to get strong enough to actually farm Duriel so you can get high item power, good uniques, items, and just chances at uber uniques as well, which means to me that a really high geared player, someone who's level 100 and properly in a build, should be able to just sort of keep farming Duriel. If that's what they want to do, they should be able to do it. That's the loop they want. Instead, to farm Duriel on repeat, you need to farm both varshan and grigoire. And while varshan isn't too difficult to get relatively frequently just from doing normal activities in the world, grigoire requires you to do Helltide, nothing else. And not just doing Helltide normally, but specifically saving up 300 cinders to spend at a chest of living steel within Helltide, which will sometimes glitch out and not be there. Sometimes the cinders will glitch out and you don't get the normal amount either. Helltide's just a bit of a mess right now. And then when you open a chest for 300 cinders, if it's there, you get 3 living steel, 6 if you get really, really lucky. If you push the hell out of every Helltide, you can get 4 of these chests if the reset lines up right, 5 if it is one specific area, but generally speaking, on average, if you spend a whole Helltide with these as your only goal, you'll come away with around 12 living steel. It costs 5 living steel to summon grigoire, and he drops 1 shard of agony most often, which means 2 grigoires is 2 shards. You get 2 grigoires per 1 Helltide, which means that you get 1 Duriel for each Helltide. Farming an entire Helltide results in 1 Duriel, no matter how strong you are, no matter how fast you clear them, because the chests are limited, which means you are just innately capped on how much you can actually farm this in a single day. And it brought up a lot of issues that Helltide has, especially when you compare it with a seasonal specific mechanic, which is Blood Harvest. Blood Harvest is essentially Helltide, but with denser mob packs, more interesting actual events going on, a lot more loot drop rates, which is fantastic, and it doesn't have any downtime. It just moves at the end of the timer and you lose nothing. To put it simply, I think Helltide just needs to be made a lot more like Blood Harvest is, and that would fix a lot of the problems, because Blood Harvest is great, and Helltide is not. Then we have the other main seasonal mechanic, which is the vampiric powers. I love these. They went a lot simpler with them than they did with the malignant hearts in Season 1, but that simplicity let them create something very healthy and enjoyable for the game. There are a ton of very good vampiric powers, but nothing is so absolutely broken that every build in the game uses it to get 300% stronger like the Barber Heart from Season 1. Overall, it feels like the vampiric powers lean towards giving attack speed as their main thing if you dig into that side of it, and it's led to a lot of people calling this the season of attack speed, where builds that benefit the most from attacking fast just get the most possible reward from the vampiric powers, and honestly, that's fun. As long as this isn't what every season is like, it's great. It's way better than the first season, so we'll have to see how they continue the concept of powers into Season 3 to see if they stay on the right track. That said, the 2 main things that I want to bring up here are Hunter's Acclaim as a system tied to the Blood Harvest. I think that's garbage. The vast majority of the rewards that you get from it are just like busy stuff that fills your inventory that you'll never actually use, and then they just lock a couple of vampiric powers in there just as a bit of a time sink. I think that entire system is unnecessary. We never actually needed Hunter's Acclaim at all. That said, the way that you unlock the vampiric powers in general, the way that you actually get choice involved in it, it's not pure RNG. There's RNG. You have to choose between 3 things to upgrade, but you get to choose between those 3 things. And I think that actual part of it that lets you have choice is important. And the fact that you don't have to worry about improving them once you've gotten them to level 3 the first time is also very important. The Malignant Heart sucked because if you had a good one, it didn't matter because you'd probably have to replace it when you got a better piece of gear, and that was not enjoyable. The way this was done was much better. Other than that, we've got our new stuff being added in mid-season as we continue forwards, which includes the 5 malignant rings being dropped today actually, farmable from Varshan, so keeping the unique target farm aspect rolling, and each of these contains a malignant heart power from Season 1, which was taken and modified and put into a ring for permanent use and altered a little bit just for funsies and balance. On the whole, I love this as a concept, but I think they could have chosen better options in some cases. For example, Sorcerer got Tel Rasha, which is just a pure massive damage boost to most Sorcerer builds. It requires a little bit of thought to keep it active, but it's such massive reward that it's worth it. It is easily manageable and very rewarding as a result. And then you have Rogue, who got the funky decoy trap power, which is fun, don't get me wrong, but in a world where Sorcerer gets full damage boost, it sort of hurts that Rogue didn't get the random chance to apply all imbuements on hit, because that is just way more powerful. But that's sort of it, right? Most of these malignant powers on these malignant rings come down on the side of interesting additions that you can choose to use to augment builds that already exist, or just use to make bad builds a little bit better. But then you also have the Sorc ring, which is just pure power and adds a lot to already the best build. That said, I'll have more to say about the specific choices of these rings tomorrow once I've messed with them in game personally, but I think the general concept of bring a few select powers from a previous season back as uniques is a really good idea. I just think that their choices of which ones could have been maybe a little bit more consistent across the classes. Then on December 5th, we have Enchantment Preview Window, which is a nice fix of something that should have been around from the start, honestly, and then also the addition of the Abattoir of Zir. This is looking to actually be a really genuine time sink of an endgame mechanic, and I don't mean that in a bad way by any means. It's essentially looking like a sort of nightmare dungeon above nightmare dungeons. There are 25 tiers to this place, and starting at tier 1, the enemies are already level 155, which is basically a tier 101 nightmare dungeon. There is a timer in this place, unlike nightmare dungeons. There are mob clear sections and boss fights as well, so this might be the actual challenging content that has felt a bit missing from endgame this season. And honestly, it almost feels like it's supposed to be a bit of a precursor to what the Gauntlet is going to be in Season 3, the way that the leaderboards are going to work around. It is a set dungeon that you get to do over and over on higher difficulties and just try and get better at it. And if it fills the role that they want it to, it'll be great. If it actually becomes our most challenging endgame mechanic, if it becomes something that's actually rewarding for doing that, it will be worth it. And mainly the thing that I'm happy about, until I actually get to judge the mechanic properly itself, is that we are getting something as sizable as this as a mid-season addition. And if they do that in future seasons where we get lots of little content drops, the game will be in a lot stronger place. I think it's smart to have these little bits of endgame content dropping in later within a season when most players have actually reached that part of the game. Aside from that, there is the winter event. It looks just sort of okay, really. It's not anything particularly special, just a little fun, little hey, have some cosmetics for doing a little bit of busy work and enjoying the wintry air or whatever. It's no big deal, but it's better than nothing, I guess. And moving on from that to just parts of the base game, they really have fixed a number of major gripes that I had that existed with the system. Things I didn't mention are stuff like the experience rate has been increased dramatically. There are tons of people at far higher levels than they would have been last season at this point with the same time investment, and that just makes the game feel better for a lot of people. Glyph experience was also made better, but not really proportionally so mostly we're just hoping the glyph experience from Abattoir of Zir is absolutely nuts so we can just speed level all of our glyphs, but that is definitely something for them to fix a bit in the future, especially in between seasons. Another good point is that the Tree of Whispers gold reward was buffed so massively that gold just does not feel like a concern anymore this season for any player. But the flip side of that is that we have so much gold that the enchanting bottleneck for changing the affixes on your items is now Forgotten Souls, which means that we have to do more Helltides. And that brings me back to my earlier gripes, which are Helltide in comparison to most of the rest of the game just does not feel good. Helltide needs changes. Past that, there is the stash system as well. We got filtering and searching, which is nice, don't get me wrong, but somehow stash space feels like it's more of an issue right now than it ever has been in the past with this game, and that's saying a lot because it was a really big issue before. The main reason is actually sort of awkward. Blood Harvest as an activity added in Season 2 has an insane item drop rate on both rares and legendary. It's actually extremely valuable for the time that you spend there. But the problem with that is that it also means you're just getting a lot more items, which means you are putting more things in your stash because they're good, and we don't have more stash space than before, so it fills up faster than it did before, and you just have to spend more time playing Inventory Management Simulator deciding what is actually worth keeping and what you have to cut. The changes that we got to the stash were good, but far from enough. We need way more stash space. One of the proposed fixes to this that the developers actually have responded to this weekend and confirmed they are working on, saying that they expect to do this and have it in the game sometime after Season 3, so quite still a bit waiting on that sadly, but it is the idea of moving legendary aspects that you extract from gear into your codex of power, rather than taking up inventory space. That way, the only gear that you have to save is uniques, parts of build that you want to use, or rares that you are saving because they have good affixes. Legendary effects won't be a reason to actually save an item anymore, and that itself would really cut down on stash usage an insane amount, so the sooner that comes the better, but it's not here yet. But when it is here, it might fix a lot of the issues. And that's pretty much it really as far as the changes going on. I will make note that I haven't forgotten the launch day for this season was a little bit rough. There were some server issues, they had to put out multiple bonus patches and hotfixes. The season journey literally was not working for the first few hours, and not to mention that trading had been shut down recently for a number of days because of an issue that cropped up, and that stuff should be remembered and weighed, but I think even including that, this season was just such a massive success comparatively to Season 1 in the base game. I don't think this is the ceiling of what Diablo 4 could be by any means. I think there are plenty more ways for it to be fixed and made even better, and plenty more ways that a season could be more impactful than this one. But if we are comparing this to what Diablo 4 has presented us before Season 2, it is simply streets ahead. All I can say is while most of us were pretty done with Diablo before these changes hit, the game is actually just alive again. And that should tell the devs that they did something right here that they should probably try to work on in the future. All that really remains to be seen though is just how long this jolt of life will last in the game, and that depends entirely on what they choose to do with the game as time goes on. Overall, right now, with this, I'm happy. It's hard to argue anything past that. I don't want to overshadow the gripes that I still have. The game still has problems that need fixing, but if they keep working on fixing the flaws, if they keep doing what they did for Season 2, then by the time the expansion rolls around at the end of 2024, I might actually be willing to spend a bit more money on that content, and that is a stance that I really did not think that I was going to be holding a month ago. Good job, developers. As a result of that, good job, Diablo as a whole. It's not perfect, but this season has been a massive step in the right direction, and that's what matters more than anything else. That's about it then for my thoughts on everything. How about the rest of you then? Of course, there are going to be problems that you found in your gameplay that I didn't really have in mind. We play different ways, we focus different activities, stuff like that. So let me know your own gripes, or even the changes that you enjoy that I didn't get around to mentioning that deserve a bit more praise. Either way, I think we can all agree that there is some life back in this community now. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.